exactly what I'm after. Thanks for choosing to watch the video. We're fishing for perch again. If you watched my last perch video, it was about tackling floodwater. And in this one, I'm going a step further in that I've now decided to move on to the canals. As part of my sort of floodwater strategy, if you like, I've decided to have a couple of additional waters to fall back on. And I've been meaning to do the canals for a while. The river really is in a terrible mess and has been for a while, and it feels like now's a good time to stretch my legs and discover new ground. And so this one is about me perch fishing on the canal. I have fished parts of this canal, but like 30 odd years ago when I was a kid, so it's as good as just going to a completely new venue. So it's a bit of an opportunity to show you my whole approach to trying to find perch, decent perch, on a completely new venue. So let's talk about my starting point. My first port of call was Google Maps. It makes absolute sense to me to use this. I knew I didn't want to travel too far from home, so I was looking on Google Maps of stretches of canal that were within a reasonable drive. On Google Maps, I was actually looking for specific features, and I've mentioned them in previous videos, things like where rivers come together, where rivers join, maybe weirs. I wanted to understand where the bridges were. I wanted to know where the lock gates were. I wanted to know where if there were any marinas. So Google Maps was just really good at navigating around the canal and getting a feel for it without even leaving my armchair. On Google Maps, I'm flipping between street view and actual satellite view, so really do get a feel for what it is that I'm tackling. Just get a general feel for the areas that I want to start in. I certainly didn't expect Google Maps to give me all the answers, but I'm just looking for a starting point. On top of that, I took some of those town names and some of those destination names that I like the look of, and I punched those into Facebook groups to see if there's any conversation around those on Facebook groups. Sure enough, there was a few bits and pieces, and I felt like I'd done enough research. None of this is a substitute for getting out there. I felt that I had a reasonable list of spots that I wanted to investigate on the canal. So my first trip, I started more north. I decided to travel much lighter than I normally would. You've probably heard me say that I'm an advocate for lots of short sessions. Well, that's gone out the window for me on a new venue. I've got to put in the graft, I've got to put in full days because I've got to cover a lot of water to find these fish. Maybe once I've found them, I can substitute long days for shorter sessions. But right now, I'm just trying to find those fish. I'd got rid of the rucksack. All the kit was just on my body that I needed, and I was just going to cover as much water as I can. What I'm going to share with you now is my second full day on the canal. My first full day was a bit of a disaster. We started slightly more north, probably covered about 15 miles of canal for one wasp. So it certainly weren't setting the world on fire. Was a bit of a disaster. But then the water was almost just as coloured as the river. So the conditions weren't great. I wasn't really feeling it north, so I come slightly south. That's where you join me now. So it's my second session. I'm on the canal and I'm trying to hunt down those perch. Yeah, I'm not sure about this. I've walked miles now, at least 2 or 3 miles, and it's just all straight, fairly sort of featureless stretches of river where I've got nothing of any sort of significance at all. Can't see any bait fish, nothing in the edge. Just feel like it probably feels like this when you're on, well, it does feel like this when you're on new water. Feel a bit lost. So I've done about, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 steps. So it's probably about 6k all the way up along the stretch, and it felt barren, really did. Just straight river, barren, no signs of anything, no follows, no plucks, no bait fish, nothing. Absolutely zilch. I'm not even going to cast the lure on the way back to where I started. I'm going to get back to where I started, and I'm going to head along the water in the opposite direction. So again, a complete fail. It does show that, you know, we don't just land on these venues and just catch perch straight away. It's a second blank, and covered again an awful lot of water, you know, 10 or 15 miles to try and find those fish. No excuses on that one. The water looked good. You know, it wasn't coloured, which is a positive thing. I'll show you what I was using for what it's worth. I'd introduced a few more shads into my fishing, thinking that the canal, if you know that the way I fish, I use an awful lot of creature baits, an awful lot of worms, but I'd try to introduce more shads into my fishing because I was searching, and because I just sort of felt on the canal there were more bait fish, you know, than you know, my river here is crawling with crayfish. So anyway, I felt like I should introduce a few shads. So I've got a Q paddler there, I was using that. Was also using these, they're the 9cm shad teas. Had that in a couple of different colours. Was using this as well, a vibra worm by Crazy Fish. It's called a vibra worm, but it looks more like a shad to me. I was also still sticking with my nimbles, you know, in a variety of different sizes, but none of that was working anyway. So decided to come down the river, south even further. I've got a list of spots still. So I came further south still, and there was a likely looking spot, and I used to fish this one as a kid. I used to catch loads of minnows, loads of gudgeon there right the way through the year, and just part of me felt like if they're still there, then obviously I wasn't perch fishing, like decent perch fishing back then, I was just catching minnows. But if they're still there in the abundance that they were, then maybe those perch might not be too far away. I never really expect to land on fish and just get instant results, especially on a new venue. I knew a certain amount of graft would be, you know, it's really, really cold now. We're in the depths of winter, you know, it's January, so the fishing's going to be pretty tough. But what I do expect is to actually learn something to take into the next session. So now you join me on my third session. Check out how this one started. Do you fish along here at all?
We're just fishing the match up there now.
Oh, are you? Is it any good along here?
Is it any good?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest,
you never fished it?
We've never fished it.
Oh, haven't you?
But the only reason we fished it is one of the members came down here about 10 days ago.
Yeah.
He had some crackling perch.
What'd you say?
He had some crackling perch.
Did he? That's what I'm fishing for.
Yeah. Well, I saw the photos.
Yeah, yeah.
The biggest one was just over 3.
Nice.
He had a couple of nudging 3.
A bit louder?
The biggest one was just over 3.
Nice.
He had a couple of nudging 3.
Biggest one was just over 3. Couple nudging 3.
And he had, you know, about another 6 or 7 pound of it. It was all perch.
All perch, yeah, all right. Good to know.
Yeah.
I might not be wasting my time. So that'll do. What a gift. What I did next is I just dicked around the canal for a few hours, knowing that you know, that match was starting at about 9 o'clock. I was going to check in with them at lunchtime, see if they'd caught any perch. Went back there at lunchtime. Sure enough, they had. And this is where time on the bank is priceless, because there's a match going on up there. Had a chat with them. One of the blokes has had a couple of perch, and he says they're definitely over £2. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on them. I mean, it's about midday now. What's going through my head is that they will probably fish there until what, I bet 3 o'clock, and then they'll probably be done, I'd imagine. I could swoop in there with my lures at 3 o'clock and do the last hour on top of some spots that have probably been pre-baited all day, which is extremely sneaky, I know, and a little bit underhand, but well, sure enough, got to 3 o'clock, they were all off home for their Sunday roast, and I swooped into position. Right, just got my first hit of the day. Let's cover that again. Longer leader, that's only £5. Tiny, tiny hook. A small 1.8 inch, no 1.6 inch nimble. So everything's scaled right down. Let's see if I can get a bite. Got one in the end. I've had to scale right down to that. You can see it's a tiny little 1.6 inch nimble there in order to catch these fish. That's a nice one. Probably just over a pound maybe. I'm not going to bother getting the serious camera equipment out for him, but yeah, happy with that. It's a start. And there we go, we got one. Had to scale right down and got a lovely clean little perch. Let's hope there's some more down there. Now that I've found them, I switched to the squirm. I fished into dusk and sure enough managed to catch a few more. So finally we were onto something. What was interesting there though was, even though I knew the fish were there, I still had to adapt my approach to actually start getting bites. What came good for me in the end was the nimble. It often does for me. Let me show you something though in terms of how I had to scale down. If you look down in front of me here, I've got a few different sizes of nimbles. 5 inch, 4 inch, 2.5 inch and 1.6 inch. And you know, started up here on the 4.5 inches and quite quickly was scaling down to just try and get that first bite, to try and locate them. And in actual fact, it was the 1.6, the tiny, tiny one, that actually got a result in the end. And it's interesting, I have found that in fishing in the past, that when things are really, really tricky, sometimes scaling down does get me the bite that I'm after. So on to the next session. Now we're only doing short sessions because we found the fish, and this one is just an hour before work. Right, got one. Got something. What is it? Oh no, it's a pike. Oh damn. Oh well. There's fish. Yeah? It's not what I'm after. Well, I can see a few bait fish here. So I'm sort of optimistic about this. There's a little pike here. Maybe there's some perch as well. Oh, that's a shame. That's nice perch size as well, isn't it? There we go. Little pike. Not what we're after. Put him back, hopefully get a perch. So for that pike, I'd switched to the Squirmz. Not setting the world on fire, but then I was only there for an hour. Was there again a couple of days later, and I was going all in with the Squirmz now. It got really, really cold, fishing the Ned rig, hoping to pick up a decent perch. exactly what I'm after. Oh, yes. It's a cracker. Yeah. There we go. That'll do us. Super job. Well pleased with that. Super job. We've managed to get one on a squirm. It's taken quite a lot of effort, but that is a stunning perch. Really pleased with that. I'm going to get him back. Hopefully we might be able to get another one. We're just coming into dusk and it feels good for another bite. Let's hope so. What was interesting on that session, although I didn't nab another one before dusk, a guy called Stan, he turned up. He actually fished the stretch a lot more than I have, obviously, and he's had some really nice fish out of there. He said up to 50 centimetres. So I have found a location where the perch are. I've kind of done it off my own back with a bit of help. So as always, I try and think about, what can we learn from this? I think Google Maps was great just for highlighting a few spots. I wouldn't get too hung up on that, but it is useful just for sort of checking out a few areas. There is no substitute for getting out there time on the bank. Make sure that you're talking to people. Make sure you're talking to other anglers. I think in terms of Facebook groups, I didn't ask anyone any questions. I don't think people like to answer questions on Facebook groups like that. If you want to talk to other anglers, get on the bank and go and talk to anglers. They're much more willing to share information with you if you're out on the bank. You've gone to the effort, you've kind of put yourself in the right place, and in that scenario they will talk to you and they will share with you lots and lots of stuff on a one-to-one without tens of thousands of people reading or watching or whatever. There's no substitute for just getting out there and doing the legwork. Part of me wonders whether, are we speaking to the matchman enough? I think if you are doing those early sessions on a river as well, make sure you're going out at weekends when there are other anglers around. I tend to avoid weekends a bit because I don't like the banks being busy, but it actually worked in my favour on that occasion that there were other anglers around. I made a point of speaking to them. If there are matches going on a Sunday, I think it's definitely worth keeping an eye on what people are catching in the matches. Also consider, of course, that match reports are put online. So, maybe we're not looking at those close enough to see exactly what is being caught by these matchmen. Finally, the only other thing that I learned from that, I think, was scaling down. Even when I was using the Squirmz, I was making sure that I was using the 3 gram jig heads, not the 5 gram jig heads. I think it made a difference in that cold water. It made my drop and my fall on the lure really, really slow. I think that's worth taking into account, maybe scaling down your lures if things are actually getting quite tricky. Thanks for watching the video. If you did enjoy it, then please like and subscribe and all that stuff. Until the next video, look after yourselves and stay safe.